All right, welcome back, subscribers and YouTube followers, and those who are just stumbling on the video. Well, here we are on this last video of the three-part series where we're replacing the armature plate. So in this episode, we've already taken care of the broken wires, and now we're going to put the replacement plate back on the armature, and if all goes well here, we'll get this soldered on and get the tabs reattached, and then we'll give it a test and see how it does. So something I want to point out here, you can notice how the armature plate itself is pretty snug. So that center hole is near perfect for the center shaft in the armature, which keeps it centered between all three of the prongs. And then what we'll do is we don't have to worry as much. It's not nearly as critical where these prongs are, but we'll just get them back over, get them bent back in that little slot. That way it holds it in its spinning motion and keeps it in the right place. And then in terms of that plate itself, the comm plate being center of the armature, it's going to self-center, and that way we don't have to worry too much about it. So all in all, that looks pretty good. This next phase, what we're going to look at here is getting the windings wrapped back around it on each of the tabs and getting that all squared away. And we'll take a minute here and decide if we want to potentially put a little glue or something on each of these tabs just to make sure we don't have any problems with it slipping loose. A lot of the Super 2 tabs, they have it almost like a crook on the end, and they will latch onto them a little better. This one seemed to be almost more straight, so as we work on it, we'll decide what we want to do. We may leave it, we may put a little something on there. And right now we're just trying to get the wires laid out and decide exactly how we want to wind it. Because we added extensions onto some of these wires, sometimes it's worth changing directions rather than coming immediate to the upper side of what you're looking here and just then beginning to wrap around. We may go across the backside and wrap backwards, and it doesn't really affect the performance. It really all comes down to how the wires lay across the comm plate. And since we did that repair, we don't want to put any undue stress on those soldering joints where we reconnected those wires. So if we can keep them flat without bending them any more than we have to, that's a perfect scenario, but it's not always the case. Whereas if we would have kept, in this case, those particular wires on the close side, we run a good chance of either breaking them, or those solder joints would be directly on top of the comm plate when we go to solder on the wires to the comm plate, and it's possible that we may lose those connections and then be starting over from scratch on those wire extensions. So we'll take our time here and get them wrapped around. I typically like to make 2 loops, which is going to be a lot of wire. So having 2 wires from each side on the Super 2 plate, that means you're going to have 4 wires crossing every time you make a loop on these plates. Now they are super fine wires, so that helps some, but you're going to get some pretty significant buildup. If you've got one of these from the factory or an original, and you look at it really close, you can see where they almost touched it with like a small grinder or a sander on most of them, and where they shave that down just a little bit to keep it from dragging. But I try to keep them all as flat as possible, and that way we don't have to do that. But from time to time I will have to take a little sandpaper and touch them a little bit just to get that extra clearance in there. These things are just ever so delicate here, just being extra cautious as we wrap these new wires back around here. And even the original wires, because we unwound from the outer portion, they're still going to be very, very brittle. like to use tweezers. Sometimes you can get a little bit better, get a better hold to them and snug them up, but you can't really feel how much tension you're putting on them. So sometimes I'll switch back and forth depending on how things are going. And I'll try to squeeze them flat, make sure they're laying as flat as possible across the com plate. Then loop them across the backside a third time and just have them lay down there for now until we're ready to trim them up. Now, on occasion, it just depends on how things are going. Sometimes I'll put a little drop of glue on the backside to hold those wires in place and keep them snug. And that way when we go to actually do the soldering, they won't jump around and move on us, or actually separate from the com plate and hang what would theoretically hang down and rub the chassis once you put the armature in. So it depends on how cooperative the wires are being on that particular armature as to what I might do, but as long as you do the same thing to each of the 3 tabs, it really doesn't matter a whole lot. And for original Super 2s, I'd almost recommend it anyway if you're running them, just because those wires are so loosely wound and with the centrifugal force. They've been known to throw wire off before. So it looks pretty sporty. I like it when they're nice and packed in. Trying to get these separated accordingly. Make sure I haven't lost one here. You can see, remember we talked about in the earlier video that adding these extensions on is really not changing the length all that much. And you can see by this one, that solder joint is literally right on the turn as it goes around the com plate. So we haven't added that much. We've just added enough length so we can wrap it around and get a second loop on it to make sure we're going to get really good contact when we do that final solder across the com plate itself. But it is pretty tricky because if you get the wire too hot, you run a risk on actually melting or melting the wire extension that we put on, not just melting enough solder to where you're soldering it to the com plate. In this case, how I'm rewrapping these, that's originally how they were done. They were wrapped on that upper side. Not a huge fan of it. I almost prefer an X pattern, but for the nostalgic purposes and just how things are working out with the wire extensions, it seems to be okay. So we'll go with it. If it wants to cooperate, I'm willing to play ball. This is pretty tedious. And once I've got them pretty much where I want them wrapped around the tab, the wires that are coming off the armature pole, I'll try to push them to the inside. On rare occasions, you'll find an original that it's almost just hanging off the side of the com plate, and I think that's how a lot of them wind up broken. I'm gonna take these flat tweezers, give it a little squeeze, try to get them flat as possible, and then we're moving on to the third terminal. Again, you can see that copper joint is literally right at where it loops around the comm plate. Sometimes these wires are shorter than others. Main thing is you can get 2 wraps around them. You're in pretty good shape. You probably want to come back and trim them anyway. And that one was kind of poking up a little bit, so we'll just take it and squeeze it down, lay it down against the comm plate itself on that back side. It should stay put. Looking pretty good. Just trying to flatten it out a little bit, get them bunched up together. And this is excess that's hanging over. We can and I've modified the comm plate so it looks as close to as original as I can possibly get it. Someone knows what they're looking for, they'll be able to spot it right away, but at least it doesn't have writing and stuff on it, so it's a little bit of a nod to the originals. They're not quite exact, but pretty close. So now you get a little bit of a zoom in here, a bit better look what that looks like after we've gotten them wrapped around the tabs. Now we're going to put just a little bit of glue on here. Figure it's best to hold those things in place. Plus, we're going to put a little bit on the wires themselves and make sure they stay nice and flat against this plate and they don't sling off once the armature spins up. So there's a whole lot kind of landed on there. We don't need a big build up, just enough to hold it. Great part is once you've got this glue on there, you don't have to worry about them backing off or bumping it with the soldering iron and messing them up. They're going to sit pretty still, and that glue is going to hold them in place on the bottom side, almost as if you had helping hands there pinching them, but they're so delicate we don't want to take any chances with that. So this is a dry end of a fine point Q-tip there. Just getting some of that excess buildup off of there. No need to have it on there. It's not necessary. And I'm I'm using the UV cure glue. That way we can go ahead and tack it up really fast. I don't have to worry about touching it. I can go on and continue my process without the fear of it moving. If you use a regular super glue, who knows where that stuff's going. Plus it's, you know, pretty strong. It might do white stain. The UV glue is pretty friendly to work with. So now we've got them tacked, we'll just kind of get these wires to look the same all the way around, very gently. Don't want to snap them off. Yeah, but that looks pretty good. So now, just short of actually doing the soldering on the top side, we're getting pretty close. And what I'm doing here, so that piece that was laying over was actually would have been a third wraparound, which is excess. It's more than necessary. So we'll just back that off and very gently just nip it here and get that out of there. And now we don't have to worry about it. Yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. These snips are new for me. I hadn't used them before, so trying to get a feel for them here. I think it turned out all right. So now we'll just repeat that process on the other two tabs. You can find these plates online, various different places. They don't look like this when you get them. There's a little trick I do to them to make them look a little bit different. So there's just a couple here. Same deal. Very gently nip those off. And I'll just take that little bit that's kind of hanging out past the glue, just wrap it back around there. It's not going anywhere. And figure out on this last one, did we have any excess? One thing you want to be careful of, you don't want to get the glue up on the comm plate, because that stuff will not solder. That'd be a bad day. Yeah, it might be. Yeah, there's a little one there. They were kind of short, not too much to deal with, but you can see how well the wires are sticking now. They're not pulling off and unwinding, which is what you want. You go do that solder process, you want them to stay nice and still, because you're going to lay that soldering iron right across them. Yeah, that part turned out pretty good. Well, so far so good. I don't see any broken wires, and nothing appears to be causing a problem, so I think it's time to move on to the next step and see if we can get it soldered up. There's a little still shot for you guys so you can get a really good look at it before we go to the soldering phase. Joker's kind of swollen, but don't want to go in my holder there. Alright, so I use a little flux. Remember, we have cleaned the wires. We did that at the very beginning after we got the extensions put on. The comm plate is brand new. It's never had anything installed on it, but it's always good to throw a little flux on there. Just makes things bond a little easier. Okay. Make sure you get a really good connection. And then a little trick that I kind of come up with along the way and how I do the solder. I'll show you that in just a second. Found it helps a whole lot with the flux, allowing that solder to kind of move around freely once it gets nice and hot. So you see the solder, rather than feed the solder into the joint where I'm trying to weld the wire to the comm plate, I take just a small piece. This way I can kind of control and dictate how much solder is actually going to be melted into the connection. So I'll cut a piece about the length of the wires and then just place it just to the inside of the wires on each of the tabs. Now you can do this all kinds of ways. Whatever floats your boat and works for you, by all means, you just do that. I found this just worked for me. I always had a serious problem where the solder would jump onto the iron and then I'd feed more, and next thing you know I got a giant blob on each tab. So I figured, well, what the heck, solder runs towards the heat, so what if I just put the solder on the inside and then I take my soldering iron and lay it to the outside, just touching the wires, and then once I know the solder melts, that it's heated all the way across. So you'll kind of see it there, melts the flux first. And then we just leave it on. You can see it as it begins to heat that solder. Just moves right on across there. And then I'll give it a touch or two. Sometimes you have to go off and back on to make sure you're getting those wires good and hot. But you don't want to get too excessive with them. Remember, we've got those joints that we extended on, and we get them too hot, they may try to jump off. So that's another reason why we wanted to put a little glue on there. That way they don't move. So if some strange reason they did get hot enough to kind of loosen up those solder connections, that they wouldn't move, and once it cooled it would just reconnect itself. So that was a little bit strategic in why we did it that way. And this one seems to be not quite cooperating, so what we'll do is we'll let that one cool a bit, give it a twist, move on to the next one, and see how this one does. Clean the tip up a little bit, maybe that'll help. But you can see the flux melt, how it cleans the tab. There, that's better. That solder melts and then it'll run towards the iron tip. So what it's doing is it's trying to heat the wire itself, so it will saturate all the way through. And ideally, you can actually still see the wire. It's just so thin that the wire's protruding and you don't have a ball of solder on top. So that one turned out like it was supposed to. Now let's hit this third one here. Same deal. Flux gets hot, cleans the tab, and you can see the discoloration from the flux actually cleaning off that copper. That's no big deal, that'll clean up. Kind of moving it back and forth a little bit. Yep. The solder is going to draw towards the iron, so I was just making sure we got it all the way to the edge of the tab. That way it holds the wires nice and snug. And we'll go back to this one. This one, it's got like a little hole right there in the middle. It almost acts like the wire itself wasn't getting hot. So we'll just, after we've let it cool, we'll give it another go. You can see the solder melted in a little bit better that time. And boom, just like that. Give this one a quick touch too. If you keep throwing heat at it, you just run the risk of messing something up. So coming back after it like that sometimes, after it's had a chance to cool, can help. There you go. All 3 tabs are soldered up. Looking good. Yep. Let's get it close now where you can take a little closer look at it, and all that flux, we can clean all that up and prep it up. I just use like alcohol to wipe it off and get that stuff off of there. There's a still shot where you guys can kind of see those wires now that we're all done. And let's see if we can't do the same on the opposite side. Now it's all soldered. I think that turned out pretty good. And we'll go ahead and we'll bench test this too. And hopefully we can, you guys can see it firsthand how she's going to do. So yeah, let's go ahead and get a little alcohol in a little cup here and a Q-tip. Be kind of gentle with it. Clean that off. And you can use electronics cleaner, which is pretty much the same thing. And look how nice that plate looks after we get it all cleaned up. Yep. Looking good. Now let's give it a ohm check and see where we are. Let's make sure all the connections are working. As we talked about in the very first video, that if you have even a single broken wire, it still might have connection, but your ohms will be off. Yeah. So 4, 5, 4, 6, 4, 5, 4, 6, and one more time. You know, 4, 5, 4, 6. So everything's looking pretty sporty. Well, that's a good sign. Now on to the actual in-car bench test. So we got to get it into the chassis, and we'll just pop a plate on there, no armature, and see what she does. Now after we've gotten it cleaned up, another close-up look. See, it's pretty flat across there. There you go, all original Super 2 windings. An armature that was once no good as an original with a plate replacement. Now, set that to the side and we'll drag our track over and give it a check. See how she does. Well, I think it turned out pretty good. It's definitely got some high RPMs, running pretty smooth, so I'm pretty excited about that, satisfied with the way it turned out. I really appreciate you folks watching these videos. Just make sure to hit the little bell. That way you'll get notified. Like and subscribe to the channel, and give me a thumbs up, all that good stuff, and follow along. There'll be some other videos coming along. Here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looks like now. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye.